Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I am Kemper Donovan, and I have quite the interview episode for you today, listeners. My guest today is no stranger to the All About Agatha podcast. Dr. Mark Aldridge has been coming onto this show since the very beginning. I believe my co-host, Catherine Brobeck, and I first had him on to discuss the many adaptations of Murder on the Orient Express, and it was our pleasure, and then my pleasure, to invite him back again and again and again. As many of you know, Mark is a professor, the Associate Professor of Screen Histories at Southampton Solent University in the United Kingdom, to be exact. He is the author of 3 books currently, all of them significant contributions to the world of Agatha Christie scholarship. 2016's Agatha Christie on Screen, 2022's Agatha Christie's Poirot, the greatest detective in the world, and 2024's Agatha Christie's Marple, expert on wickedness. And he is the co-host, along with Gray Robert Brown, of the outrageously engaging and informative podcast, The Swinging Christies, all about Agatha Christie in the 1960s. And indeed, Mark's most recent appearance here was a crossover episode between our 2 podcasts, because that is the world we live in now, in which podcasts cross streams, as it were. But I will be speaking to Mark about none of these endeavors today. Apparently, all of the above simply wasn't enough to keep Mark, the busy agathologist, quite busy enough, because he went and got himself involved in another project, which is the creation of a writing course by BBC Maestro, in which Agatha Christie herself, or at least a likeness of Agatha Christie, more on this later, so very much more, teaches the tricks of her trade, the craft of writing a mystery. This is probably something you've heard about because it made quite a splash when it was announced a few weeks ago. The course is now live, and I want to let you all know that before sitting down today to talk with Mark, I did my due diligence and I took the course. I watched the lessons, I took notes like a good little student, because it was important to me to have this conversation from a place of firsthand experience. I know there are many out there, because I've heard from a number of you, who are fairly horrified by this course and who have no plans to engage with it. And that's fine. That is obviously your choice. But I know there are many others who are intrigued by it and who would like to learn more about it. And there's no denying that this is a major development in the world of Agatha Christie scholarship. So I'm very glad that I was able to check out the course and that now I am able to sit down and talk about it with Mark, who was the project research lead on this endeavor and very much involved in the words that issue forth from Agatha Christie. And yes, I am using air quotes. Oh, how I am using air quotes. You can bet that we have a lot to discuss today. Welcome back, Mark.
Thank you, Kemper. Yes, I've been really looking forward to the chance to sit down with you and actually go into a bit more depth about this, because I think the headlines and the sort of initial thoughts that people might have don't necessarily reflect what the course is. So I'm really happy to give some details and let people know what work went into it, really.
Yes, we exist in the weeds. We get into the nitty-gritty here on this podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to do that with this because there's a lot. There is a lot of detail and a lot of grit, the good kind of grit. So we will definitely be talking about it. First, I'd love if you could just take us through how you came to be involved in this project, who contacted you, and then the due diligence that I have to imagine you did yourself to make sure that this was something that you wanted to be involved in.
Yeah, so it was 2 years ago. It was June 2023. And I had an email from Michael Levine, who's the CEO of BBC Maestro. And he basically emailed me and said, look, we're starting to have conversations with Agatha Christie Limited about the possibility of doing something Agatha Christie related. And we've got a proper big meeting on Friday. This was like a Tuesday, and this is having a big meeting on Friday. Can we have a chat? And I was so uninterested at that point because I was just like, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm really, really busy. I didn't say this to him, but I just thought, God, I'm so busy. Do I even want to have this phone call? And I thought, well, I'm intrigued enough to have it. And so he called me up and we had a chat, and he's lovely and he's a proper fan as well of Agatha Christie. And so we had a conversation about what they were thinking of doing. And it was obviously a bit of a shock to hear what their actual plans were. And I just said to them, yes, there is the material out there that you could put together a script. It would be difficult, but it's possible. There is no way that Agatha Christie Limited are going to let you do it. And I said, just do your best, but they're just not going to go for it. And I think that was the feeling for quite a long time, was that quite rightly, Agatha Christie Limited and the Agatha Christie estate, which are not necessarily the same things, they absolutely wanted to be convinced that they certainly weren't going to say, oh yes, lovely, you go and get on with it. But they were more receptive than I had expected. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how it might work. And actually the first few things that I had to do, because I did say, look, I'm happy to go along for the ride, but at any point when I'm not happy, I'll step aside if that happens, which it didn't. And I had a few provisos, which were I wouldn't do anything unless it was with the agreement of Agatha Christie Limited, and most particularly that Matthew Pritchard, obviously Agatha's grandson, was kept in the loop and was happy with what we were doing. And that was fine. So they were happy to agree to that. And so the first things I had to do, whilst we were sort of finding our feet and working out the feasibility, was firstly reassure, I think particularly James Pritchard, who was worried that there simply wouldn't be enough material. So I put some material together, and I'll talk a little bit in a while, I think, about where that material came from.
Yeah.
And so it was enough to say, yes, there is enough here to build a course out of. But the other thing we did right at the beginning that took the first 6 months or so was locating the material that could be used to transform whichever actor ended up playing Agatha Christie into someone who looked and sounded as much like Agatha Christie as possible, which I absolutely understand is a sort of red line for some people. That's the point at which some people go, I don't like this. And, we're in really complicated area here. And so I very much wanted to make sure that everybody was happy with what they were doing. And frankly, I felt that stuff about the appearance of Agatha Christie was very much up to her family. And that I wanted to make sure that my part of it was as good as possible. So anyway, that's a very long-winded way of saying we had to find a lot of as much sound, as much imagery as possible of Agatha Christie to see whether the technology was feasible before we went further on. So I had, funnily enough, for other stuff, often for the festival, I like to show in Torquay each year, I like to show something that people haven't seen before. So I'd been locating a few scraps of Agatha Christie's appearances that people didn't know about. So I had some video, some film footage of her, obviously high resolution photographs, audio, including things like a BBC interview she did. And I think they tried with the audio recordings for like her autobiography and some of the dictated stuff, but I think that was a bit too poor quality to use in the end. So that was the first big thing we were doing, was bringing all of those things and just seeing whether it was feasible. So we spent a long time on that, and I think they sent it to a couple of different companies in Hollywood, and I think one apparently came out on top. I wasn't really involved at that stage, to be honest, with that side of it. So I didn't see it until about a week before it was launched, because that's how much, the work was done sort of higher up than me, I guess.
Well, and it's two different. That's really interesting, though, that for you had to clear two separate bars. I mean, one of them I think is pretty obvious, which is the one: is there enough material in terms of a writing course, right? So the substance of what this course is going to be about. And I mean, funnily enough, if someone had asked me, I would have been like, well, maybe not, because it's a perennial complaint of mine on this very podcast that I think Christie didn't talk as much as I would have liked her to, right? About her writing process, and not even talk, even write, especially in the autobiography. But I mean, well, I'll be honest with you, having taken this course and watched these, the 2.5 hours plus videos of what is the majority of, Christie's own words on her writing, I now realize, I guess when you actually, really put it all together, there's more there than one would think. So that was sort of, one of your initial tasks, but then also just making sure is there enough in terms of her likeness for someone to be able to even engage in this project to the point where her family, and specifically, that makes a lot of sense that it would be Matthew Pritchard because he's the one who knew her the most.
Yes.
Obviously, her great-grandson did not have. I'm not sure if he was alive at all.
He was. He doesn't. Yeah, he'll tell you himself that he doesn't really remember. He remembers. That I've seen him say before that he remembers Matthew breaking the news of her death to him.
Oh, wow.
But I don't think he has any clear memories.
Sure, because he must have been quite young.
Yeah.
That she passed away. But obviously Matthew knows her extremely well and, was very close to her. So it makes sense that would be the bar. But that's really fascinating to me that you could also be involved in that process because, yes, I have sat through, or I should say enjoyed. Sat through sounds like I didn't enjoy them, but I've enjoyed many a lecture by Dr. Mark Aldridge in which you include videos of, there's the one on the street where she's accosted in front of the mousetrap. And you can tell she's like, oh, get me out of here. This is awful. And then that also, she's sort of like on a panel or something in kind of a ballroom. And
yes,
that
that's the 10th anniversary dinner for the mousetrap.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she's much more comfortable in that one, right? Where you can tell she's a little bit more at ease and, interesting that of course you would be able to contribute to that as well. And we have a lot of high res photography, especially of her in later years. And that is also, to be clear to anyone who is not going to see any of this course, the Agatha Christie likeness that was used, the Agatha Christie who is quote unquote brought to life, is older. She is more of the Agatha Christie from the 1960s, dare I say. She is certainly not a younger version of herself. I don't know if did they ever pinpoint an age for how old she was?
No, we had long discussions about this. And when we were writing the script, I decided that we were going to situate the script in the early 1960s because I felt that was a point where she had a huge amount behind her in terms of work, but that we knew there were interviews from around that time that we could really draw on. And so I felt that was the best. Truthfully, she looks younger than that. So we say, well, it was her on a really good day. Because actually, I think that the main basis of photos from about 1950 that tend to be used. But that also contributes to the fact that this is a sort of a version of Agatha Christie. It's that we're not saying that she actually obviously sat down and said this and we found some old film footage or anything. It is a sort of version of Agatha Christie talking to you about it. But yeah, we did have that discussion about whether to pin down the date. So in my head, she's talking in 1960 actually, but we never say that. And we allow ourselves a little bit of flexibility to around that because you've got to make use of what you've got, really, and you want to use it in the best possible way.
And that makes sense. There's a little introductory video before the course begins when you actually engage in the course on BBC Maestro that explains the process a little bit of how this all worked. And one thing that James Pritchard actually said on there, which stuck with me, was this is not an impersonation, it's an interpretation. And I think that makes sense where it might be, a lot of the words are coming from the 60s. She looks like she's more in the 50s. And, we'll get into it, but there were a couple of moments where, because I know some of these sources so well. Like at one point, the text being quoted is something that she wrote much earlier. So she has to make reference to her then husband, because the husband who she's referencing is Archie, not Max. Yeah. But obviously as Agatha Christie, the, reconstituted Agatha Christie of this writing course is definitely married to Max Mallowan, not to Archie Christie. So those, there are going to be those sorts of little awkwardnesses that have to be smoothed over. But that's why it really is an interpretation. And one thing I did appreciate in that explanatory video, she's sitting in this kind of library or study or office. It feels like she's sort of in an office-like environment. And that is in no way a recreation of any actual room that Agatha Christie, the person, existed in. It's more of an interpretation of what a room like that would look like at some point in the middle of the century. And that too, it's not like you could pinpoint that to the 60s. If anything, I would think it's much earlier. And that's okay. This is someone who Agatha Christie is representative of the 20th century overall almost. So, to be kind of a little bit of a magpie and choosing different reference points that are a little bit all over the place, I think it's an acknowledgement, or at least that's how I encountered it, an acknowledgement of, yes, like this is not a recreation. We're going for a vibe here.
Yes. Yeah. And also, I guess while we're on that subject, about the AI, because the AI is, in all the headlines and everything, just to be crystal clear, I think we're both of the same sort of perspective here, that I don't use AI at all. I've never used ChatGPT. I haven't done anything like that. The AI that's used in this course is very limited and very specific, and none of it has got anything to do with what she's saying. The AI is a part of software that was used to modulate Viv Keane, who's the actress playing Agatha Christie, modulate her voice and alter her appearance slightly to make her look and sound more like Agatha Christie. And again, that may well be something that people just don't like the idea of instinctively, and I absolutely understand that. But it isn't just being sent off to ChatGPT. These are skilled sort of technicians. The sound was done in Ukraine, the visuals were done in Hollywood, I believe. And all of the stuff that was used, from the script through to the images as the basis, was all licensed. So nothing's being stolen here to make her appear and sound more like Agatha Christie. And certainly there's no AI in the script whatsoever. So I just thought, while we're early on, just to be really clear, because I think people who, I'm sure no one who's listening to this would be, this sort of had this perspective of like, it must have just come from AI and sent it off to ChatGPT or whatever and said, write me a course, and it came back. But just to be really clear that that's what the AI was used for, that final stage. I did see someone say, it's just going to be an Agatha Christie chatbot spewing AI nonsense out. And I thought, no, that's not it. I mean, there's lots of reasons why we might not be keen on it, but hopefully what she's saying is should not be one of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, AI, I think, has become an umbrella term and very, because it's an umbrella term, an imprecise one. So I think people use it to mean a lot of different things. And I think that's really important. This is not a chatbot. The words that she is saying were carefully selected by you, in fact, and by a team of researchers who you assembled. And I'll just be honest with you. I'll be honest with you, Mark. I'll be honest with all the listeners out there. I don't use AI when I'm doing any of my own writing, when I'm even really doing any of my own researching. As far as I know, I have to imagine that AI has indirectly helped me a whole bunch, as I think it has everyone, because that's just the world that we live in. But I try to minimize it in my life. And I'm not a big fan of the voice and the sort of visual modulation, even in this. Did I enjoy watching Agatha Christie, quote unquote, Uncanny Valley Agatha Christie speaking to me? Not particularly, but I thought that what she had to say was really interesting. So it's why I'm super glad, because I know you and you're a friend, but also because you're the person who was involved in the aspect of this course that I find by far the most interesting and that I think will be the most interesting to listeners out there. So I'm glad that we two are the ones speaking. But yes, I think that is just an important distinction to make from the outset, and also to give all of those technicians their due. It's something I know very little about as well, but for what it is, it does seem to be incredibly well done. And I know that it was done with about as much rigor and, sort of intention as it possibly could be. So I think that is important to acknowledge, but it doesn't mean that you have to like it. And again, there's a lot about it I don't really like.
Well, I just would say to that I'm completely sympathetic. And like I say, there's a real range of perspectives here. And I honestly don't know how I'd feel if it were my grandmother that, someone was looking at them. My grandmother wasn't Agatha Christie. But I think that the important thing is that if this had been an easy question to wrangle, if we'd been able to answer what, how happy people were with it, and this course would have been out a year ago, right? There's a reason why it took 2 years, because that's how long it took for everybody involved to certainly on the Agatha Christie Limited and the family side, to all be really, really happy with it. So obviously, through the whole process, everybody has known that this isn't as straightforward as going, oh, this is fine, everyone will love it, everyone's happy with us doing this. It's a bit of a tightrope. So yes, I'm completely sympathetic that there will be some people on one side saying, this is absolutely not what I want, and other people saying, actually I find a real use for this, and lots of a range in between those two viewpoints, I think.
Well, let's talk about the research, which, as you know, is one of my very favorite topics.
My favorite bit too. Great.
Yeah.
Yes, this is what we're leading up to.
It's obvious why BBC Maestro came to you, because you've really made yourself a leading authority on Christie research, especially when it comes to, primary sources, manuscripts, letters, etc. You literally travel the world. You, in fact, were just globetrotting, looking at all sorts of different libraries and repositories of all sorts of interesting primary sources. So I know that you drew on a lot of these sources when you were doing the research necessary for this project. And I'm wondering if you could just give us a sense of the breadth of those sources, because I heard so much in there from the autobiography, for instance. I'm a big scholar of the autobiography. Yes. That made me very happy. And there's a fair amount of quoting from Christie's mystery novels as well, yes, which is wonderful. I mean, we really do get a lot from the texts, but I know that there must have been other sources, less obvious sources that you drew on, and I just love to hear about some of them.
Sure. So I actually already had a document that I keep where I put the text of various interviews that she gave over the years. She didn't give that many interviews, but actually, once you sort of put them all together, before you know, you've actually got quite a few thousand words. And so that was my starting point in adding some more to that, adding stuff from the autobiography to that. So a lot of it was interviews. A lot of it was the autobiography, as you say. A fair amount of it ended up being, at quite a late stage, actually, after the first draft script had been submitted, Maestro were really happy with it, and then said, what we really like are the bits where she's quoting from her own works. Can we have a bit more of that? And so that's where I think the script came alive a bit more, because, for example, Christie would often say how the opening of The Body in the Library is maybe her favourite opening, or one of her best. And so then you can have her actually read it out. You can actually, and then in the workbook, for those doing it as a course, you're asked to identify, well, what about this opening really works? What do we learn about characters? What do we learn about situations? Why might a reader be interested? So it sort of breaks it down a little bit more and allows her to read it out. So that was the main bulk of it. And yeah, some of the quotes are not so well known because they're perhaps from obscure interviews. Right at the end, just as we were putting the workbook together, actually, Agatha Christie Limited, I don't think they'll mind me saying, said, the splash quote right at the beginning of the workbook. I don't think Agatha Christie said that. That might be one that's like an interpolation or a paraphrasing or something she said. So can we swap it out for something else? And I was like, no, she definitely did. And I could send them sort of the interview and go, here it is. She's saying, about writing professionally and all this sort of stuff. So there's quite a lot there that we could work from that perhaps is less obvious. So lots of different sources, also things like her notebooks. So we allowed ourselves, I had sort of self-imposed rules about what I did and didn't allow, which was that we were allowed to include anything that was objectively true. So what I wouldn't allow was any little flourishes that you might be tempted to add. So for me, it's absolutely fine to have her say, when you're writing a mystery, you may change the plotting at certain times. Occasionally, I've even changed the murderer whilst plotting a book. Now, that's not a precise quote from her, but we know from her notebooks that she did it. So you can take quotes that are similar to that. You can look at that material from a notebook, and that is objectively true. What I wouldn't allow was little bits of fun that you might want her to say, I always start my day with a cup of tea so that I'm in the mood to start writing. Well, she didn't say that. And we certainly don't know she did that. So that's exactly the sort of thing that I wouldn't allow, because even though it might seem harmless, she didn't say it. And as far as you know, she didn't do it. So that's what I was really clear on. We used as many quotes as possible. The vast majority of it is quotes, some of which have to be paraphrased a bit, some of which we would often merge things, because she might tell a story in an autobiography and tell a very similar one in an interview, and she might it might be points 1, 2, 3 in the autobiography and 2, 3, 4 in an interview, and you can put them all together, right? So that's where we really approach it, to make sure that everything she said was a quote or a very close paraphrase, or was objectively true. So that's what we really went with the whole way through. Because I should talk about my team. I know that you asked before off mic about the team. So right at the beginning, I think the first idea was that I would just write it. And I said to Maestro, no, I want to have a team with me, which they were very, very receptive to and very happy for me to do. And that was for 2 reasons or 3 reasons. Firstly, I had a book to write, and so I didn't have infinite time. Secondly, I knew that there were people with other specialisms and other knowledge that they could really bring to it. So I invited Jamie Burntle, who obviously is an absolute Agatha Christie, expert, knows his stuff, knows the text extremely well, of course. Michelle Kesmer, because her stuff about cluing, I thought would be really, really helpful. And she really, really knows her text as well. Not to say that the rest of us don't, but she's read stuff of mine in draft form, and she's so good at picking up on things that I haven't even noticed about, even misspelled sort of obscure names or what happens to a character off sort of page. And she'll be like, oh no, I think actually this is mentioned later. Go, well done, Michelle. And then Gray, who obviously I worked with on The Swinging Christies and as a writer, and I thought would be really helpful. I mean, we're all writers, but I thought that it would be helpful for someone to come in with that sort of perspective. So I brought them in. Everyone had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. It was like it's like Clue. You're inviting everyone to a mansion and you're not allowed to tell them what it is until you get there. And then you got to open the letter in front of everyone else. So I explained to them, and so I could see their face going, what? Like, really? But they were all very up for it, very on board. And I shared with them the master document, which I put together, which was about 22,000 words of quotes about Agatha Christie's writing from her, and a rough outline of how I thought it could work. And I asked, I should say, Michelle and Jamie to take the lead on the sort of structure side of it. So they tweaked my structure. They added a couple of sections, moved it around a bit, made it much better. And then we sort of assigned each topic to each other. I think I did actually, depending on what people's specialisms were, really. I gave the cluing one to Michelle. I think I gave the one about publishing to Gray, I think, and Jamie about characters, I think. And I did the introduction, I think the conclusion. So I wrote the introduction first so that everyone could get a sense for the tone and the style that we were looking for. Mm-hmm. Because even though it's all Agatha Christie's own words, you've got to find a way to make it flow. You've got to work out how formal or informal you want the phrasing to be, whether you need to tweak it a bit. And of course, she's talking to you, so there's a little bit of tweaking in the phrasing there with that. So that's what we did. And then they just worked really hard. I mean, we all worked hard, but they worked really, really hard. And yeah, I think it was the end of May last year that we had a full draft all sort of ready to send off to Maestro. And then it went off to Agatha Christie Limited and Maestro. The original idea was that it would go to another writer who would, maybe a screenwriter who would sort of tidy it up. But actually, they didn't need to, so that was quite nice.
It was so good. You did such a good job.
Thank you. We had a bit of feedback, but nothing huge. Literally, it was stuff like them saying, "Oh, we'd like some more quotes," and so I did the final pass. What I found is that you don't really think about it too much, because I wanted to give everyone as much freedom as possible, because they're all grown-ups and experts, and they certainly didn't need me breathing over their shoulder. But of course, what that means is that when it actually arrived, there'd be some great stories that everyone wanted to use. So I had to remove some duplication, like the thing about, when people ask, where do I get my ideas from? I'm tempted to say, I go shopping in Harrods. I think that popped up 3 times in the draft that I saw, because it's so good. So I had to be quite careful at that, and just sort of getting it all consistent, really. But they did such a good job that I didn't need to do that much. So it was a real joint effort. And they also read each other's sections as well. And I should say, which I didn't get around to saying, which is the other reason why I wanted a team, was to keep me honest, frankly, was that I think that it was such a big project that I wanted to have people on board who I knew would challenge me and challenge each other if they thought anything wasn't right. So if they were like, you paraphrased this sentence, but actually I don't think that's quite the meaning that Agatha Christie meant, let's go back and see if we can tweak that, that sort of thing, which actually didn't really happen. But that's what I wanted. I wanted to have people on board who I trusted would say to me, or indeed to each other, I don't think that's quite right, or there's a better quote we could use here, or anything that we could do to make it as good as possible. So that's why I really wanted them on board, obviously for their genius and brilliance and how good they are at writing and research, but really as a bit of a reassurance for me that other people who I trusted had taken a good look and worked on this.
Well, you put all these experts in a room together, and you're going to make each other's work that much better. And the combined enthusiasm alone, just must have been through the roof. So it's really funny. You said that Michelle did the cluing section.
Yes, I think, yes, she did. I'm sure she did. Yes.
So in this cluing section, Agatha Christie, air quotes, talks about the cluing in Five Little Pigs. And
yes.
the cluing in the beginning of it. And I was like, oh, that's Michelle.
Yes, well done. Yes, you absolutely got it. Yeah. I mean, that's a good example of the sort of reverse engineering that you could do of when she was talking about a text, that if it's that you could say, well, this is how she might put a clue on page 3 or whatever, or might use it in these relations. So yeah, I mean, Michelle knows that all so well. She's so good.
I've just heard Michelle talk about the brilliance of the early cluing in Five Little Pigs so many times. Love you, Michelle. I know she's listening. So yeah, and of course that would be one of the factual statements, right? Where that's sort of a statement of fact. And yeah, I mean, I will say this: it was very obvious to me how carefully this whole thing was written, because I was looking and listening, I should say, for something that felt off. And I couldn't find it. For the most part, I was like, oh, not only do I recognize this, I know exactly where this is from. Or if I didn't, for example, there's a great, in the case of the rich woman, she talks about the inspiration for that case.
Yes.
From that Parker Pyne short story. Was that in the I'm putting you on the spot here, so you might not remember offhand, but was that from the autobiography that she's talking about that? Or
it might be. I think it might be from the introduction she wrote for Penguin. Because when they'd released some Penguin, she wrote special introductions for them. So I can't remember whether it's the autobiography or that. But it's one of those two, I think, from memory.
I mean, but other than that, I wrote down, and this I think is also a really good example of a statement of fact that is just a little bit of interstitial kind of filler that you need just for the flow of things. At one point, she quotes from Ariadne Oliver in Mrs. McGinty's Dead, who of course goes on at great length about the adaptational process, what it's like to be a writer whose works are being adapted into other media. And when she finishes that, she says, I will allow you to decide whether that is really Mrs. Oliver speaking or myself. And I have to imagine that's, you wrote that, right? Like that.
Yeah.
But that's not, there's no claim there. There's no sort of like that, and it just allows you to have the quote from the text and then sort of move on, and you're making a point. That's the sort of invention that's happening here, and it's obviously just extremely careful, and you're doing everything I think in your power not to distort Agatha Christie's words, right? Which which is the irony of, and why I know you wanted to be very clear about the fact that if people are up in arms about certain distortions, it's not the words. It's certainly not the words here. So yeah, I was really surprised and I think impressed by just how much of Agatha Christie's words that you amassed. And it made me realize, I think once again, I was caught underestimating Agatha Christie, because I think you get used to these truisms of, well, Agatha Christie didn't talk that much about writing and Agatha Christie didn't do that many interviews. Both of those things are true because she wrote for 50 plus years, but because she wrote for 50 plus years, even the little that she did accumulated over time in terms of the writing about writing in her autobiography, in introductions, and then talking about it in those interviews. And it's not like she didn't do any interviews. She did do some. So there's kind of a lot of stuff once you actually put it all together, because that's kind of the joy of Christie. She wrote for so long. There's just a lot there, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just looking at the document now, actually, that we used. And so what I did was I broke it down by topic. So on writing crime, on writing professionally, on writing methods, her influences, a woman's instinct, on Poirot and Marple, on specific stories, on her autobiographical elements in a book, and her characteristics of how she liked to write, and what she thought her legacy might be. And those were where I broke it down so that they were clearly headed by topic, and we could put them in each section as sort of needed. Because once you do that, actually, there's quite a lot of gold there, but there's repetition as well. There's an awful lot. If I have to read saying how much he disapproved of the cover of Murder on the Links in one more interview, then I might scream. But nevertheless, there's still a lot of gold, and really just nice little nuggets that you can just say. God, I'm really pushing for my gold metaphor now. But really nice little, just little glimpses of insight that when you marry with a quote from a book and you go, oh, I see what she means, she does that sort of thing there, that it has this extra depth. It might just be a couple of sentences from an interview, but when you actually apply it and you put it back to back with a quote from her books or an example from her books, you can see, oh yes, I can see that's actually a really good way to approach it.
Yeah. Don't touch that dial. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of our episode. We just wanted to take a moment to ask you, our dear listeners, for a favor.
If you haven't already done so, we would very much appreciate it if you take a moment to, give us a rating or a review wherever you're listening to this podcast.
It really helps the podcast out because ratings and reviews make it much easier for other Christie fans such as yourselves to find our podcast.
And the more ratings and reviews we get, the more people we can reach.
It should take you a matter of seconds, and lucky you, we're going to provide you with those seconds right now, so go to it.
Thank you so much. And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
And for Christie fans, there's just so much in here, not even just as a writing course, but I enjoyed all of these references to not only her inspiration for the woman in The Case of the Rich Woman, but she talks at length about Ammius Crail as a character. We get references to the man who Sir Eustace Pedlar was based on, Major Belcher. Mm-hmm. Same with Louise Leidner. Her inspiration was Catherine Woolley. She talks a lot about Ariadne Oliver. There's discussion of Monty, her brother Monty, and how he fired a gun at people and was that sort of a character, which we know was so important to so many of the characters that she created. Carlo even gets a mention, and pretty much all of the detectives do. So obviously there's a lot of Poirot and a lot of Miss Marple in here. Parker Pyne gets mentioned. Mr. Quinn and Mr. Satterthwaite get mentioned. Do Tommy and Tuppence get a mention in this course?
That's a good question. I'm going to get my script up. I'm going to do it quick.
I actually didn't have this written down, Mark, and I was just thinking about it as we were talking, and I was like, I think they might not be in this, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
You might be right. You might be right. Is that my personal bias showing? No, I think you're right. I think having a quick look, no, I don't think they do get a mention. But it's interesting because I have got some nice stuff about Tom and Tuppence, but that's for another project.
Oh, okay.
About how important they are, but that's perhaps a discussion for another day. No, it's funny. You sort of have to be led by what she said.
Yeah.
And I know that in our long quotes document, there was stuff about revisiting them at different ages, which is something she doesn't really do with Poirot and Marple. They sort of do get a bit older, but nothing like Tommy and Tuppence. But I don't think we used that in the end. Because I think what we had to be really conscious of was that this was a course that we were writing. And so sometimes you would have lovely anecdotes and loads of stuff that was nice, but because they're very Christie specific, we'd be like, we can have a few of these, but what we can't have is her just reading out her autobiography, right? It has to have a function for people who are going to be writing their own stuff. So sometimes we didn't use that. Like, there's this lovely stuff about someone saying to Agatha Christie about how they don't like her thrillers so much, which we didn't use in the end because it's a very specific Agatha Christie thing that perhaps isn't hugely helpful for somebody who wants to write their own crime novel. It's a little nice bit of colour, but it doesn't actually make much difference to how you're going to write. So we had to really hit that balance. And I know that James and Matthew really liked it in the introduction. That's where a lot of the Agatha Christie as a person, as a grandmother, as a wife sort of came out, because she speaks about how much she enjoys Matthew visiting her in summer and all this sort of stuff, and she writes over winter. So we set all that up at the beginning, but tried not to use too much that was just a nice little story, lovely as that is, because we had to stay focused on her method and her approach.
Well, yes, I was going to ask you if there was anything that you didn't use. So thank you for answering that question.
I anticipated that. Sorry, I managed to segue into that regardless. So, but yes, there was lots. I mean, there's loads, but it's the stuff that was very specific to Agatha Christie's own experience, like her shyness and stuff like that. It's not going to make much difference to you as a writer to know that. Lovely as it is for us as Agatha Christie fans to read and know that and hear that.
Indeed, everything is geared toward a writing course. And you brought up Matthew, and I noted that even that she, using quotes, brings up Matthew in that introduction. And James, made reference to this, the fact that, well, we figured if my father could be okay with this, then this was something that we were okay bringing to the world, which, there's an argument to be made. I don't know why Matthew Pritchard's impression has to be controlling in any way. I mean, I think, of course, you can still not like it. That doesn't mean that you cannot like it. But I'm curious if because I know you have a relationship with Matthew, if you could just give us a little bit of a sense of what his reaction to it was. I mean, it must have been strange for him to see this and to hear it. But yeah, I'm just fascinated by that. So I'm wondering if you could shed any light on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I resolved, and I said right at the beginning, about how I wasn't interested if Matthew was at all unhappy. And frankly, it wouldn't have gone anywhere anyway, but I certainly wasn't going to be involved. And I actually resolved right at the beginning that because we do have, I hope, a good relationship, we've known each other for over a decade now, that I actually wasn't going to certainly do anything that felt like I was putting pressure on him. So I actually resolved not to talk to him about it and wait for him to talk to me about it. So I was staying with him for a few nights about 18 months ago, I think. And he raised it at dinner and he said, so this BBC Maestro thing. I was like, oh, okay, we're going to talk about it. And he said, basically, it was exactly what I wanted him to say, which was, that at any point that if I'm not happy or James isn't happy, it will stop. That was enshrined in the, I'm not privy to the contracts, but certainly the agreement that there was that ACL and Matthew had the right to at any point stop it and say, yes, you might have invested an awful lot of time and money in this, but we actually don't like the way it's going or we're not comfortable with it anymore. So that for me was what I really wanted to hear, because I wanted him to be happy that he could stop it. And we had a little bit of discussion about it, and because I was saying, I don't want you to think that you're sort of doing me out of a job or anything if this doesn't happen, because I'm not interested in doing it without your complete happiness. So we had a conversation about that. And he was saying at that time, and I don't want to quote him or anything, even if my memory were that good. But basically, he was saying, that I think he was a bit surprised himself as to the fact that he actually thought that there was potential in it, and that his instinctive reaction was, let's see how this goes. So we did have a couple of chats after that point, just in general terms. I called him up to check that he was still happy with some other stuff, and he was. But the formal side of it didn't sort of take part. And then last year at the festival, and I'm going to frustrate you, Kemper, by saying I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to give you a quote, but just outside the Spanish Barn at the festival, he came up to me and we had a conversation about it, and I felt very emotional, frankly, afterwards, because his reaction to it was so kind, and the way that he felt the script properly reflected Agatha Christie was really, really. What else could you want?
Yeah.
As a fan and as a writer and hopefully expert. So yes, I don't want to put words, quoting, because I don't want it to be used as if I'm sort of passing on a particular endorsement from Matthew. But I will absolutely say that he left me in no doubt how impressed he was. And he did mention about the voice. We didn't really talk about the imagery. I don't know if it had been finished by that point, actually. I don't think it had been. But we just had the point where they'd sent through different versions of the voice, modulating Viv's voice a little bit to make it sound more like Agatha. And I know that he was impressed with that he felt that it did sound like his grandmother. So that was good to hear.
Yeah.
But yes, he's absolutely essential to it. And yeah, it's a big pressure, isn't it? And like I said before, I don't know how I would feel about it. But it's something that he obviously felt has potential. And one of the big things, the reason why I gave it the time of day at all at the beginning was because I hoped, and I hope it will, that this course will help to cement Christie's ongoing influence and be like, she's not just a dusty old relic, that she is someone whose methods and approaches can still be of help to people over a century after she began. And so that's what I really, really wanted to get out of it. Perhaps that was the same thinking from ACL and the estate. I don't know. I didn't really talk to them about it because I didn't feel it was any of my business, truthfully. I wanted to do my aspect, my parts of it as well as possible. And other questions I was happy to leave up to them.
Yeah. Well, this kind of leads into what might be the big question of this interview. And I know it's a question a lot of other people have when they learn about the existence of this course, which is, I don't think anyone, and certainly not anyone who's listening to this podcast who is probably a big Christie fan, I don't think anyone could reasonably argue that there isn't great utility in what you've done and what you and your Agatha Avengers, Michelle, Jamie, and Gray, have done in amassing all of this material as to Christie's thoughts and advice and musings on writing. I mean, I have longed for precisely such a document, given how, all the complaining I've done over the last 9 years about how little I thought she did. Turns out I was wrong. All I had to do was put in the work, right? But my big question is, why not just leave it at that? Like, why not edit a book titled Agatha Christie on Writing, edited by Dr. Mark Aldridge with, contributions by a number of other scholars, which students of Christie and mystery could consult whenever they like. And I do know that there is a written component to the course. So there actually, a lot of what is quote unquote spoken in this course is actually written down, and there are exercises and there's a very robust written component to it. So I don't want to take away from that, from what BBC Maestro has done. But what does the delivery of this material that you have so lovingly compiled by an actor in a staged room whose voice and face had to be modified to imitate the long gone Agatha Christie, what does that add to the content other than notoriety, hence attention, hence sales? That's the cynical Miss Marple in me speaking. Is there a creative justification for the visual things that are being done here and for the AI aspect of the project? And I realize you just finished saying you took care of your part of the project. I'm kind of asking you to step out of that a little
Yes.
bit as someone who's just been involved in the process overall. So I want to acknowledge that as well. But I know that's a question. I've heard so many people have said some version of that to me, and I would just love to give you an opportunity to answer that question.
Yeah. I mean, the boring but true answer is it's because it was BBC Maestro that initiated it. So it didn't come from me or anyone else. So they're not looking to publish a book. And I believe, so I was told that what happened, how we sort of got to this point, was that BBC Maestro sent out a questionnaire or did a survey as to who people would really love to have a Maestro course from. So people who aren't familiar with BBC Maestro, it's not just writers, although there are lots of writers there, but it's everything from flower arranging through to art, through to anything you can think of. Coping with trauma, I think, is one of the things. So there's a lot there. So they were asked, these participants, who would you most like to hear from, living or dead? And apparently Agatha Christie was the runaway winner. So I think that was the instigation. And so that came from the idea that, so the people who take these courses are often, so you can pay a subscription to basically access all of them. And often they are people who might want to experience lots of different things, but don't want to sit down and read a book about them. But they want that expert to be speaking to them. That's how it works. So for BBC Maestro, that's what it's all about. And so they were trying to find a way that fitted with their delivery and their whole model, which is the expert, that one person, will speak to you about their craft. And there is absolutely, and I remember saying early on, that there could be a documentary made out of this and that there are other ways to do it. But this was very much their perspective, was that they wanted to dip their toe into this water and see how it went, I guess. But that's the reason. Nobody has come to me and asked me to write that book. as you say, you can download it. It's the full script pretty much, with a few little tweaks just to make it a little bit more readable. But the workbook includes the full script and lots of exercises and things like that. So it is a publication as well, but I appreciate that it's sort of an addition, a bonus, really, for this. Yeah, and there seems to be, I mean, I don't know why particularly there's never been a sort of collected letters or collected words of Agatha Christie, but there seems to be some sort of slight barrier to it somewhere, and I don't know what that is, truthfully. So it doesn't seem, whether it's because the copyright is spread between so many people that it ends up being complicated and stuff, I just don't know. So that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. But yeah, the truth of it is that it came from Maestro, and that's how their courses work. So yeah, it's not like it was this or do something else. It was this or nothing, really.
Right. That is an excellent answer. This or nothing, I think, is truthful. And I wasn't familiar with BBC Maestro, by the way. I'm not sure if, probably people, at least in the US, will be less familiar with them. But it's also a little bit like the TED Talk series.
Yeah, I think it's quite like there's a masterclass as well, I think, which is another one, which just, this sort of thing. Yes, it is. And it's got a really nice selection. I say there's somebody who's not I'm just typing in now to remind myself as to who they're, because there's so many people who talk about it. And it sounds like I'm just like advertising. Honestly, my work on this is done. So it doesn't really make much difference to me whether 1,000 people sign up for it or not. But Mark Ronson on music production, all sort of stuff. An understanding of wine has just come up from Jancis Robinson. So it's a real diverse mix. I was told by the CEO, I don't know, I'm giving away a secret now, but one of their most popular courses is on flower arranging. Now, I suspect nobody is signing up specifically for flower arranging, or maybe they are, but it's one of those things that a lot of people were like, oh, I'm quite interested in that, and while I've got my subscription, I'll take a look at that. And there's like Billy Connolly on comedy and Jed Mercurio on writing crime, TV drama, Line of Duty and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what it is. It's all sorts of different courses, which I've quite enjoyed. One of the perks is that I got a free subscription for a year, so I got to have a nice little browse myself.
Oh, you get to go wild.
Yeah, I got to go wild. I know, how lucky.
And, start there. Who knows where you'll end? Yeah, I mean, this is just there's this is, I think, to some extent, a little bit of a 21st century phenomenon too. It's in the same spirit as makeup tutorials on YouTube and the way that you look at videos on YouTube. I mean, it's a little bit, I think, in the same spirit as a lot of these videos that we watch, and the visual element is important to people. I will be honest with you, and this would, if anyone from BBC Maestro who took all of the care to do all of the wonderful staging, and including, there's lots of close-ups on first editions of the books as well as she's speaking, and the typewriters. I appreciated all of that. But for me, probably the aspect of this, other than the script, the words that you put together that worked the best for me, was actually the sound of her voice, which did sound fairly authentic to me. And I have listened to a bunch of voice recordings of the actual Agatha Christie, right? There was a review on BBC Maestro, because I was checking out the reviews as well. And one of them said, oh, I absolutely loved this, but I'm so busy that I just listened to it in my car.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I was like, you know what? Listening to this is not a bad idea, because
no.
I found I'll be honest with you, and I do think that the actor, Vivian Keane, she did an amazing job, and I love how she is showcased in that opening sort of segment, and I think she even appears at the end, and she seems to have been lovely and have done a great job. That was the aspect of it I found less convincing. I think she, this will make me sound like I'm in some way insulting Agatha Christie, but she almost smiled a little bit more, or kind of simpered and twinkled a little bit more in her delivery than I then at least I imagined Agatha Christie. What do I know? I never met Agatha Christie, so maybe she's got it exactly right and my impression is just wrong. But I occasionally found that distracting in the presentation, but the voice really worked for me.
It's funny, the voice thing, because they sent it to me, I don't know, maybe a year ago now, their first sort of go at it. And they sent it to me with like no context, because we were desperately trying to find if there was any more high quality audio. It's very difficult. And so I replied and said, oh, that's nice. I didn't realize we had her saying that bit of the autobiography on the surviving tapes. And like, no, that's not from the tapes. That's from, that's a modulated version of Viv's voice. I was like, oh, wow, okay. Yeah. Well, if I was convinced momentarily, then hopefully other people can be as well. And that sounds like a made up sort of story, but honestly, it's true. I was really confused because I really thought I knew which bits of the autobiography survived as an audio tape, and so they must have found it somewhere else. But no. So yeah, I think the voice is very well done.
I agree. What do you think, and this is just a guessing game, but it's a guessing game I'd love to play with anyone who's willing. What do you think Agatha Christie herself, no air quotes, the real Agatha Christie, would have made of this?
It's so difficult. I mean, the coward's answer is that we can never know. But that is the real answer. What I would say is that, I don't know, and people may disagree with this, but when you read through all of her correspondence stuff and all the times she's asked for interviews and do stuff that she turns down, there is a little bit of me, and maybe I'm sort of joking here, that thinks that if you'd said to Agatha Christie in 1960, hey, look, would you like us to have someone else do all this and say that they're Agatha Christie and they can do your interviews for you and they can do all this public facing stuff? I'm not completely sure that she would have said no, but obviously that's quite a different endeavor in some ways. So I just don't know. It's such an impossibly different world that there's just no way of knowing, and you can't predict anyone. You certainly can't predict Agatha Christie. So who knows, frankly.
Yeah, I think who knows. And I think, there are a lot of people that would say their knee-jerk reaction is, oh my God, she would, she's rolling in her grave, et cetera, et cetera. I just think she was a more interesting and, as you said, unpredictable person than that. So I'm not sure what her reaction, it very well could have been extremely negative. It would probably have been more interesting in nuance than anything that we can imagine. So yeah, and she certainly was not one who was afraid to take risks and do different things. So, the spirit of innovation is a Christie-ish one. I am not saying that as one who is endorsing, in particular, the sort of the visual AI of this, as I've now been on record multiple times, not exactly my cup of tea. But yeah, what you said actually a little bit earlier about the fact that this is, in some ways, making the point that Agatha Christie is not a relic, and that, she is someone who we can draw on now and in the future for the writing of mysteries in a contemporary setting. Like, that feels right to me, because there's a reason that Christie is more relevant today than perhaps she was even 20 years ago, that there's been this renaissance, and she just seems to be getting more and more popular as people think of more and more ways to celebrate her and adapt her and continue her and just do anything and everything. There's just an appetite for all of this. So, and I think that also meaningful, I had no idea that BBC Maestro had done some sort of an audience survey and that they came back with Christie. That makes a lot of sense to me, that she's someone who people identified as wanting to hear from, because who else other than the best-selling novelist of all time to learn from when it comes to writing. All right, Mark. Well, thank you so much for all of the time. I mean, I could talk to you for hours. I have talked to you for hours, but I think we're almost done here. I just have to ask you in closing, because this was such an involved project that you've now worked on for 2 years, such a long gestational period, and there were so many different pieces to it. What was your favorite part of being involved in this project?
It was the care, I think, and attention that everyone on the project brought to it, so that there were various things. Like right at the beginning, I was basically asked, what do you need? And whatever I asked for, I got. And I can't tell you as a researcher how rare that is. That you can say, I want a team of 3 people to join me, and these are the deadlines that we can work to, and blah, blah, and to them to go, yeah, great, whatever you need to make this as good as possible. That was absolutely fantastic, to have that real willingness from Maestro to do whatever that they could to make this work as well as we could make it. And then actually at the recording, at the filming of Viv, which was in London, I was there for about half of it. And it was only at that point that I realised I knew that this was a job creator. That was a big reason why it got the go-ahead, was because nearly 100 people were employed on it to get this all together. But when you're actually there with, I don't know, maybe 30 people, actually on set, from hair and makeup through to cinematography, lighting, obviously the director, Viv, everybody, to see everybody be so committed to getting it right and for it to being as good as possible, that was just such a joy. The respect, I guess, that everyone had, that they wanted this to be as good as possible. So I couldn't have really asked for any more than that.
That's a wonderful answer. And I think, yes, I mean, wanting that team of researchers and getting them, being able to just, wave a magic wand sort of and get Michelle and Gray and Jamie to work with you on an Agatha project. I mean, I'm very jealous. And by the way, if you think that I didn't go through the exercise of which Avengers you would be, I did. And we can perhaps talk about that off mic, but they don't really correspond quite well enough to go through it here. But in any case, as I said, I got a lot out of reviewing the course for this. I think it's an extremely interesting and worthy exercise, especially I know that the intention of this is that people are going to be viewing the course for purposes of writing, but for Agatha Christie fans out there, especially for those completists, but people who just can't get enough Agatha Christie content, I certainly enjoyed it on that level. And there's something to be said for that. I just really appreciate you coming on and speaking with us, Mark. And dare I ask what you might be working on next? I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's an NDA involved, so you can't let us know. But what do you have coming up?
Yeah, well, I think there's no NDA, but I know that I think David Braun, my publisher, has said at an event that I'm working on another book for HarperCollins, and you may wonder what that is, and I'm not going to tell you because it's years away from being done. But my deadline's not till the end of next year, and may even shift beyond that. So I'm very cautious not to say too much about it. But I'm working on another book. Let's put it that way.
I'm very glad you're working on another book. We can have that to look forward to. I love knowing that is in the future, another Mark Aldridge offer.
That's very sweet.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Kemper.
Thank you again to Dr. Mark Aldridge, the hardest working agathologist out there. Can't wait to see what he cooks up next. And I mentioned that I've heard from a lot of listeners already about this BBC Maestro course. If you have strong feelings about it that go beyond, I hate this, that are anchored to specific thoughts or principles that Mark and I did not cover in our conversation, or if you have engaged with the course and would like to share your reaction with me, email me at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. I just may include some of those responses in my next listener mailbag episode. The mailbag is beginning to fill up again, listeners, so keep those messages coming. They bring me great joy. I actually have a lot of messages to answer. I've been a little derelict in that department, but please know I read every single word that you send me, and I think deeply about your messages. Sometimes it takes me a beat to respond, especially because I always want to do so in a thoughtful and thorough manner, but I do indeed cherish those messages. For my next episode, I'm doing another interview. This is with a man named Steen Just, who is more or less the caretaker for the Agatha Christie Wikipedia page in Danish. So I was able to speak with a mega Agatha Christie fan from Denmark. I got to talk to him about Scandinavian crime fiction and how that may or may not overlap with Christie's crime fiction. It was a fabulous conversation. I can't wait to bring that to you. So that's next time. If you are looking for more All About Agatha content, head on over to the podcast's Patreon page. There's a link in the show notes. For June, I covered A Daughter's a Daughter by Mary Westmacott, both the play and novel. It was a fascinating read. Both versions were a fascinating read. I had a lot of fun covering that one. You can find the podcast on Instagram at All About Agatha, and you can find me at my author website, KemperDonovan.com. I've got a link to my website in the show notes, as well as links to my first 2 mystery novels, which are currently available for purchase, The Busybody and Loose Lips, books 1 and 2 in the Ghostwriter Mysteries series. And of course, as usual, I want more ratings, I want more reviews, I want more people to find this podcast. I am always looking to maximize this podcast's reach, to bring together as many Agatha fanatics as possible, so please do keep those ratings and or reviews coming, and I'll see you next time. Bye.